You know, I think remakes are pretty cool. It's nice to breathe new life into old games. Remakes have basically always existed since forever, but I do remember a point when they felt more like a special treat. Like, a remake was cool simply for being. As kids, we didn't really think about the implications of how faithful a remake would be, or how well it would evolve the concepts of the original, but I'm sure to some extent we were still subconsciously aware of that stuff. For the purpose of this video, I will primarily be referring to video games, although I will briefly mention other mediums throughout the video. As time goes on, it does feel as though people are putting remakes under more scrutiny nowadays, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. In a day and age where older media is becoming harder to obtain legitimately, it makes sense that people are starting to place more importance on the remake preserving the spirit of the original. But the rise in critiques didn't come out of nowhere. Rather, they were simply the byproduct of that other thing that's been on the rise, the demand for remakes. Something I've noticed in recent years is that a lot of the time, these remakes kinda get treated like checklists of things people want changed or fixed from the original. It's a pretty reductive way to discuss them, in my opinion. Instead of wanting to explore new things that would fit well with the original game's intent, it feels like people are more interested in revising it. Look, there's nothing wrong with a remake refining and polishing stuff from the original. It's to be expected. But it feels like we're reaching a point where people are starting to view remakes as a catch-all solution for fixing games. Like bruh, just because a game has flaws doesn't mean it needs a remake. No matter how much you remake a game, it'll never be perfect. In the next decade, people will want to fix things about that remake too. And look, I'm no stranger to games being remade multiple times. Two of my favorite games of all time have had multiple re-releases. But like, at what point do we decide to just take a game for what it is? Some of you might assume, as soon as the game gets remade, and this remake will be the definitive way to play it. But people 2 console generations from now might not agree with you. Games advance alongside technology. Sure, I could boot up a Windows 7 computer and navigate it just fine, but if you were to put most people in front of a Windows 7 computer in the year 2025, they'd probably be like,
where's my AI assistant? Why is there no text-to-speech?
Maybe I should have gone back a few years further so I could introduce him to Clippy. And no, this isn't just an age thing. Despite technology becoming so much more ingrained in our lives now, people are ironically becoming more technologically illiterate. Like, app design in general is leaning more towards making things as straightforward and simple as possible, possibly to a detriment. This design philosophy is starting to apply to how a lot of people nowadays view video games. I'd wager to say that it's because of the modern app design that's basically ingrained in people's lives at this point that people aren't willing to learn and navigate an older game's mechanisms, regardless of how well designed the game is on the whole. An example that comes to mind is how Sonic controls in the Sonic Adventure games. I watched a video recently by Splash Dash. In the video, he explains how the homing attack used to be just a means of giving a little bit of precision to help Sonic hit the enemies in a 3D space, and use them to bridge across gaps. You're actually supposed to somewhat aim and push Sonic in the right direction before and after each homing attack. It's not a fully automated lock-on. As time went on though, the game started making the homing attack more and more automated, and basically conditioning the player to over-rely on it as the main means of keeping Sonic on course as opposed to platforming. You notice a similar pattern here? Much like modern app design, the easiest way to achieve accessibility is less emphasis on actual high-level engagement and more on complacent routine or cheap thrills. In a theoretical Sonic Adventure 2 remake, how likely is it for Sega to impose this safe homing attack model onto the game to make it less frustrating for the people who are more used to the newer Sonic games? If they were to do this, I'd at least hope they put in a toggle setting for a more free control homing attack, like the original. But even then, The remake would likely be designed with straightforward enemy chains. Anything too complex might conflict with the auto lock-on of the modern homing attack. That's not to say all the new Sonic games are bad, they've got plenty of other shit going for them. It's just this one fundamental area that weakens them overall. So as much as I would love to say, just port everything, that's not exactly enough to satisfy everyone. Even if you were to argue in favor of ports over remakes, that leads into discussions about that old game jank. Man, what even is jank at this point? I've been sitting on my ass trying to think up of a solid definition for the word jank for hours. I'm genuinely convinced that no one actually knows what it means. It's just a buzzword people say to dismiss old game design, regardless of how well it actually works. And more so because it doesn't conform to modern or familiar conventions. Looking up the definition, it essentially boils down to, it's bad. But no one really elaborates on how so. It's like when people complain about games having bad writing in them, when that could mean a lot of things. Or it could mean nothing. The way most people seem to use the term, it seems to imply some sort of awkwardness or not behaving in the way the player expects it. Again, this is still pretty vague and honestly doesn't even sound like an inherently bad thing. It has the potential to run off into user unfriendliness, but I feel like this becomes extremely subjective depending on who you ask and how you look at it. I literally, a few hours ago before writing this, had a conversation with some friends about this, and we all had a hard time agreeing on what's really considered jank. We disagreed on a lot of the examples being brought up to each other. Is it the result of datedness? If that's the case, does that mean jankiness is relative to a game's age? Could all the games we play today be considered janky one day? A game you consider really well designed could be widely written off with this innocuous umbrella term one day, and I imagine you probably wouldn't appreciate that. While awkward, clunky design will always be a factor to consider, it'll never be the end-all for whether a game's design is actually well thought out and meaningful. I understand some design choices in old games were the result of technological limitations at the time, however this is also true for every other form of art. Digital drawing tools didn't always exist, films didn't always have CG. Part of the artistic process is working around the limitations of the tools available at the time, and thus the achievement in overcoming that hurdle shouldn't be dismissed. Dare I say, it might even be worth witnessing for yourself. That rant aside, I wouldn't hold it against anyone for not enjoying a game because they just couldn't adjust or get used to the way it plays. I once saw a video here on YouTube about this topic. I will keep the uploader anonymous this time. As much as I disagree with their position, I know some people can get very overly protective of the original versions of games, and I don't want this person to get harassed. So, in this video, the uploader gives an anecdote about how their friend just couldn't get into Kingdom Hearts 1 because of things like the camera, the platforming, and Sora's stiff movement. Now personally, I'd argue Kingdom Hearts 1 Sora is more mobile than people think, but that's besides the point. They propose that a remake would not only help better introduce people to the game, but also allow them to share their love for the game with a new audience. On one hand, I can understand this sentiment. It sucks when you try to introduce someone to one of your favorite things, but they just can't share that same enjoyment with you. Here's the thing though, as much as it sucks, maybe the game just isn't for them. This doesn't just go for anyone trying to introduce a game to someone, this applies to yourself too. This applies to anyone who wants to like a game but just can't. I noticed this a lot with Persona 3 before it was remade. A lot of people very strangely wanted a remake of this game that they didn't even seem to enjoy outside of the general idea or general story points. It felt more like they desperately wanted to enjoy it out of some sense of FOMO. I got the sense these people really just wanted to be in on it, without actually engaging with the ludonarrative gameplay that played a huge role in defining that game. I've already defended Persona 3 to hell and back in another video that I'll just link here, so I'm not gonna waste your time with that again. I'm not even trying to give people shit if it's not their cup of tea, that's totally fine. Okay, listen guys. You know it's okay to just not like things, right? If you don't like a game that's well regarded by a lot of people, that's perfectly fine. To make an example of myself, I fucking hate Persona 2 Innocent Sin. While there are some aspects that I appreciate about it, the narrative doesn't speak to me. I think the characters are overhyped, and I fundamentally disagree with the game's design philosophy. Eternal Punishment is better, and while I don't dislike it, I still have some reservations about it, many of which are simply remnants that carried over from Innocent Sin. But you see, I was more than ready to just accept that I don't like the game and move on afterwards. While I don't doubt a Persona 2 remake would sell well, my first thought upon finishing these games wasn't to sit on my thumbs for a remake that'll appeal specifically to me. Sometimes, your tastes don't align with a creator's vision, and that's totally normal. Games don't have to be made for everyone. I'm not against a remake being made. I don't doubt a remake could provide good gameplay additions and changes. I just don't need it. Like, I think there are more important things in life than a Persona 2 remake. I don't know, that might just be me. Now, this is normally the part where someone brings up quality of life and accessibility. I feel like people greatly misunderstand what either of these terms mean. When the average normie on the internet says the word accessibility, that motherfucker ain't talking about settings to help blind people see the stuff on screen or make the visual effect safer for epileptic people. You know, stuff that would actually benefit the cause of accessibility. I'm talking about the guy who hates turn-based RPGs complaining that the turn-based RPG is too hard for him. If we're going to accept video games as a form of art, we need to accept that not every work of art is made for everyone, and thus, neither is every video game. Accessibility doesn't mean it has to appeal to everyone, including the people who can't even be bothered to engage with the game's mechanical depth or challenging themes. Those things shouldn't have to be compromised, but we're at a point where game developers might not feel like they have much of a choice. This could honestly branch off into its own separate video, but for now, let's get back to quality of life adjustments. Yeah, I like quality of life enhancements. The one feature I will always point to in terms of quality of life enhancements is Final Fantasy's ATB gauge. The original Final Fantasy IV didn't even show your time gauge, despite introducing the active time battle system. Later versions of the game would add quality of life enhancements, without actually changing the game's mechanics. Not only was the ATB gauge visible now, but now you could see the amount of time it took to cast your spells in addition to turn wait times. Does this inherently change the way the game works? No. It gives the player a little more information. It might slightly affect your choices when choosing what spells or abilities to use, but it won't drastically change the way the game is played. The casting times were always there, now they're just more visibly indicated. The game is more user-friendly without needing to compromise the mechanics. What a lot of people expect out of remakes nowadays is to simply morph an older entry of a series to the conventions set by the newest one or other modern contemporaries. I can understand this to an extent. Video games were still trying to figure themselves out back then. What's known to work wasn't as well known back then. Adjusting to some modern conventions is warranted and can make jumping into a game less cumbersome for the new player. At the same time though, conforming too hard might actually work against the game. You know the complaints about how modern video games all feel the same? That might be a direct result of conforming games to what the majority thinks X type of game should be. Persona 4 should play more like Persona 3 Reload and Persona 5. Devil May Cry 1 should be remade to play like 5. They should remake Kingdom Hearts 1 to be like 3. Dude, they should remake my life to be more like Dinkelberg's. I feel like these types of mindsets do come with some underlying intent of burying anything that doesn't conform to said conventions. That's not quality of life or accessibility. That's just fundamentally changing the game. That being said, I think this might be indicative of a deeper issue. Remakes were once about preserving, celebrating, and carrying on a game's legacy, but have slowly become a form of revisionism. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that people seem a little too eager to conform all the entries of a series to be like the newest one. Like, what's with people treating their favorite series of video games like a monolith? I get that every game in a series is gonna share stuff in common with each other, but what's with this brute force effort to totally homogenize them? You know, it never felt like remakes were trying to do this in the past. Sure, there were still tons of remakes coming out before people started complaining about it, but this was before everything was cross-platform. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for cross-platform releases. My life became way easier once everything became available on PC. I'm just pointing out the effect isolating games on certain hardware had on different versions. There wasn't much threat of a remake outright replacing or invalidating any other version of the game. Unless you had a PlayStation Vita, you could not play Persona 4 Golden. The original Persona 4 was also available on the PS3 store at the time, so at the very least, the choice was there. Same thing with Persona 3 FES and Persona 3 Portable. These other versions were simply alternative ways to experience the game. Hell, this was even applicable to straight ports sometimes. Take Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess as an example. The Wii version doesn't replace the GameCube one just because it's for the newer system. The Wii's control scheme is so different from anything that came before it that it's harder to call it a straight upgrade. It's just a way to experience the game with motion controls instead. If you really wanted that for some reason, I don't know. Hell, you could play GameCube games on the Wii, so you could just play the GameCube version on your Wii if you wanted to. Sure, there will and always have been debates over which version is better, but there realistically wasn't any threat of one version overwriting the other. They were just both available on modern systems, just exclusive to their own platforms. Remakes just had a really weird way of not stepping on the toes of their originals back then. Take Pokemon for example. Fire Red and Leaf Green were remakes of the Generation 1 games with the Gen 3 framework. You'd think this would be grounds for the type of remake I'm not as big a fan of, but I'd argue these might be the best Pokemon remakes. These were games for the Game Boy Advance, which could also play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. Gens 1, 2, and 3 were all playable on one device. You can literally play the original Red and Blue versions on the same system. This was the best time to get into Pokemon, the Advanced generation. Heart Gold and Soul Silver sort of capture that energy being on the DS, which could play Game Boy Advance games. You had access to all the existing regions at the time, but not the original Game Boy games. Though at the very least you could argue people still had Game Boy Advances during this time. See, that's the difference between remakes of the past and remakes now. Nobody back then was shitting their pants over how much Gen 3 or 4's mechanics would fix Kanto and Johto. Let's be real now, most of us were dumb little kids who didn't understand most of the mechanical changes. It's only in retrospect after replaying the game so many times that I really learned to appreciate their differences. I'll come back to both the originals and the remakes for different reasons. I know I'm cycling through the same few examples here, but Final Fantasy IV's DS and PSP versions are such good examples to use. What I respect about the DS version is that it doesn't just backport some mechanic from the newest Final Fantasy game, or try to be like FF7. It implements its own systems that complements the already existing mechanics of the game, rather than trying to replace or outright drop its older systems. I'm not gonna get into too many specifics, but the short version is, in the original game, stats would start increasing or decreasing randomly past level 70. The DS version's new augment system makes it so that stat growth past level 70 is based on what abilities you have equipped on a character. It's, by all means, a very respectful remake in my eyes. But guess what? They went and released another remake for the PSP 2 years later. This remake would take it a step further, being an almost one-to-one remake of the original, but with the Game Boy Advance's swappable party members and post-game content. I already mentioned the subtle but impactful quality of life changes earlier. They made both a faithful and fresher take on the game. Most remakes at the time still felt like the games they were based on. In recent days, it feels like that line has been getting blurrier. Like, you can tell there's an effort being put in to keep the spirit of the original in there, but it also feels like the game is at conflict with itself, stuck between trying to live up to the original but also trying to be as sanitized and smoothed out as possible to appeal to the highest denominator. Trying to attract a modern audience is one thing. Trying to attract an audience the game wasn't meant to appeal to is another. But being simultaneously available in the same era of games isn't the sole thing that made these remakes work. It was also how they were presented. Final Fantasy IV never presented any of its versions as the way you should be playing the game. Even after the Pixel remaster came out, the DS version was already released on Steam at that point, but it's based on the shitty mobile and tablet ports, unfortunately. Regardless, there is no ultimate version combining features from all the past iterations. That's an expectation people impose on remakes whenever they're announced now. When given the choice between two games with the same title, the layman will usually choose the newer one. I think something that would help make the original look just as appealing to buyers of the remake would be bundling the original game with bulk purchase sales. Something like what Sega decided to do with Sonic Generations and Sonic X Shadow Generations. Like, imagine if Persona 3 Reload went on sale, and they made a special offer getting Persona 3 Portable bundled with it. It would help validate Portable's remaster as a modern option, and also allow players to get the female route that Reload players would otherwise be deprived of. The average Reload buyer might not have the incentive to buy Portable on its own, but if it's being offered to them with Reload, they might just spend the extra few bucks because why not? This isn't a perfect solution because some people just won't care and not all originals or remasters of originals are available alongside their remakes. Hell, the example I just gave didn't even include Persona 3 FES because Persona 3 FES was never remastered for modern systems. A lot of the careful details and context I just gave could be considered minutia to most people. Honestly, I've been slamming my head against the wall just writing this far in, but the most frustrating thing about it is that no matter how carefully I try to explain myself, I'm always gonna get hit with the same rebuttal. The same song and dance. Shit, I forgot how it went. I think it went a little something like... Okay, I can genuinely see where people are coming from with this argument. Most people don't even go as far into detail in defense of their favorite old games like I do. A lot of them do just operate on vibes and feelings, and that's perfectly fine. Everyone does this to some extent, if it's over a game they truly care about. Otherwise, I don't think people would even care enough to have a discussion. Here's the thing though, that is not exclusive to the people defending the originals. I want you to take a step back and think about it for a second. Isn't the desire for remakes in itself very nostalgia-driven? You want devs to make these games all over again, then buy the game at full price all over again, then play it for the first time all over again, then be able to share that magical experience with all the other people also playing it for the first time all over again. Sounds pretty nostalgically motivated to me. People got the nerve to complain about nostalgia pandering, too many show reboots, and live-action adaptations, when all they do is beg for remakes of old games. It's even wilder how people are nostalgic for the feeling of buying a product, which could be indicative of something wrong with actual new modern releases. That discussion is beyond the scope of this video though. I don't think it's wrong for people to not want the legacy of a work to be overwritten by its remake. I can't speak for everyone, but coming from me, I'm not against letting games that are close to my heart reach new audiences. I'm just not too hot on the idea of something that I feel doesn't accurately represent the thing I love being accepted as if it were what the original should have been all along. I don't like my enjoyment of something being written off as, you were just 12, especially when I was an adult playing some of these games for the first time. I also need to put into perspective that, yes, I do feel nostalgia for the past, But I need to make clear where that nostalgia comes from. It doesn't inherently come from the games themselves. It comes from the memories associated with those games. I'm not nostalgic for Tak 2 itself. I'm nostalgic for the time I had a sleepover at my house and my friends got to play that game with me. I'm not nostalgic for quirky game mechanics. I didn't even fully understand how they worked my first time playing. Those are things I had to gain appreciation for over time. I don't look back at games simply to seek out things that I already liked about them. I look back at them and find new things all the time. Some are things that I'll like, some I won't like as much. To anyone still insistent that this is all still just nostalgia blindness, let me pose a question for you. What's more nostalgia blind? Accepting a game with its flaws and appreciating its quirks, or desperately wanting to revise it into the romanticized version in your head? Why do you think people still want Pokemon Black and White remakes, even after the questionable quality of Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl? Hell, if you ask me, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are where Pokemon remakes started to go downhill. Why do you think Pokemon remakes became a tradition? Why are people more excited for remakes than wholly new IPs? Do these games truly need remakes? Video games can certainly benefit from being remade. I would even argue that some games could benefit more than others, but there is never an inherent need to redo a whole-ass game. That is something we ascribe to it ourselves. No game needs to be remade. Rather, it's you who feels the need for it. Whether it be due to FOMO or clinging onto nostalgic memories, it's not something the game itself needs. It's really about your needs. No, I'm not against remakes being made in general. I'm not saying devs should stop making remakes forever. I'm just merely suggesting that maybe we don't need them as badly as people think. If we're gonna push the idea that games are a form of art, then maybe we should start treating them like it. When a person does a redraw of a character or famous artwork, most people are able to recognize the redraw as its own work and not a replacement, even if they might prefer the redraw. Why are we able to recognize the value of the original here, but less so with games? Let remakes stand as their own works instead of viewing them as a substitute. It's okay to make improvements over the original, but they should be in service of the original game's design, not at odds with it. A point that's been brought up to me recently is that video game remakes could be a lot worse. When you compare video game remakes to the film industry's remakes, those are usually more universally agreed upon to range from bad to nothing burger. I would agree with this. The video game remakes I've seen clearly have a lot of hard work put into them. But I don't think that doesn't mean we're in a position to still be critical with the state of video game remakes now. The problem with film remakes and the problem with video game remakes are very different. With film, it's a problem of quality. In the case of video games, it's less a problem of quality and more a tug of war between artistic vision and consumer expectation. I'll admit the need to remake or redo something can sometimes be artistically driven. I've remade a couple videos on this channel because they didn't fit my current standard of quality, and I don't regret redoing them. At this point, those redone videos have been out longer than I kept the original ones public. Even now, a couple years later, I can look back at those remade videos and say they might be better than most of my current content. But in the case of video games, it's usually the opposite. The need is driven primarily by money, that's the most important one, but also expectations. We've become so used to getting remakes, and thus, the gaming industry must deliver on those expectations in order to make said money. Look, it's okay to want something. It's okay to like the idea of something. The point of this video isn't to tell everyone that they're wrong for wanting a remake of their favorite game. What I'm trying to convey here is that the signs are pointing to video games being on the path to stagnation. But you don't have to stagnate with them. I'm not saying you have to keep up with all the niche and quirky indie games that are secretly these hidden masterpieces. I'm not gonna be one of those guys and be like, I just want game devs to make something new for a change. What I will encourage you to do is to try something different. Play one game that's outside your comfort zone and really try to get on its level. Everyone's got at least one game in their backlog that's different from what they're used to. It could be an old game that you were too intimidated to approach because you heard horror stories about clunky controls. It could be a more modern game that just plays differently from what you're used to. Don't set out to find your new favorite game or anything. Just try to find some enjoyment in learning how to adjust to a game in its intended form. It's like picking up a new hobby or learning a new skill. Most of the fun comes from developing your appreciation for those things over time. That feeling is what makes video games fun in their own unique way. It's what makes them fun to begin with. If you watched until the very end, thank you so much. I'm currently working on a Q&A video for recently reaching 50,000 subscribers. The video will be free, but it'll be exclusive to my Patreon. If you want to ask me questions, you can become a free member and gain access to my update posts. You might be wondering, what could I possibly have to gain from shilling free memberships over my $1 one? Well, regardless of whether you donate or not, it lets me know that you're interested in my projects outside of Persona. Like this video. Atlas content is never going away, of course. Trust me, I will never run out of stuff to say about Atlas games. I just wanted to give you all a fair warning that I'll be uploading some non-Atlas videos in the near future. This will have the adverse effect of actually getting more people in the comments asking where all the Persona videos are instead of preventing it. Which is actually a good thing, because those comments will boost engagement. So, no matter what happens, I still win.